He was the first true tragedy in the game. Before the billion-dollar empires and the flashing lights, he was the blueprint. He was a college graduate in a world that expected him to fail. He walked into corporate boardrooms in the early 1980s and looked powerful executives in the eye. They could not trick him. He knew marketing, he knew branding, he knew his worth. Music mogul Chris Lighty said this man would have been Puff Daddy before Puff ever put on a shiny suit. He was a genius ahead of his time. But here is the heavy truth. Being the first often means you pay the highest price. His death was the first murder in the history of hip-hop. The silence that followed him was louder than any applause. Picture this scene. The Bronx, the early 1980s. The air smells like burnt rubber and possibility. He watches DJ Kool Herc steal electricity from a street lamp to power a block party. He feels the bass thump against his ribs. He falls in love with the sound. He wants to save the world with music. But the streets are hungry. Some say he was assassinated to clear the path for others. Was he too smart for the industry to handle? Let me take you back to where the concrete meets the fire. Scott Sterling was born in the Bronx. This was New York City in the 1960s and 70s. It was not the city of bright lights and tourists you see today. It was a place of survival. The buildings looked like broken teeth against the sky. The air smelled of exhaust fumes and desperation. Scott was only 4 years old when his family broke apart. His parents separated. His father left the picture. It was just Scott, his brother, and his mother against the world. His mother became his fortress. She worked hard to keep a roof over their heads. But money was tight. There were nights when dinner was small. There were days when the refrigerator looked empty. But here's the deal. Poverty makes some people selfish. It makes them grab everything they can just to stay alive. It had the opposite effect on Scott. He had a heart that was too big for his chest. Even when his own stomach was growling, he looked out for others. He had friends in the neighborhood who were doing worse than him. He would sneak food out of his own house to feed them. He shared what little he had. He hated to see people hungry. He hated to see people suffer. This was the core of the man. He was a giver in a world of takers. But gravity pulls hardest in the hood. The streets of the Bronx were dangerous. It was a war zone. Gangs roamed the blocks like packs of wolves. Drug addicts huddled in dark corners. Stick-up kids waited in the shadows to rob anyone who looked weak. You could hear gunshots pop like firecrackers in the distance. Mothers worried every time their sons walked out the front door. They prayed their boys would make it back home before the streetlights came on. Scott needed an escape, and when he was 12 years old, he found it. Picture this scene. It is a hot summer night in the Bronx. The humidity clings to your skin. Scott walks to Cedar Park. He sees a crowd of people. They are not fighting. They are not running. They are dancing. In the center of the crowd stands a man. His name is DJ Kool Herc. He is the father of this sound. Scott watches closely. He sees Herc open the metal panel on a street lamp. He pulls out raw wires. He risks his life to steal electricity from the city grid. He plugs in his massive sound system. The speakers roar to life. The bass kicks Scott right in the chest. It vibrates in his bones. He sees the joy on the faces of the people for a few hours. Nobody is poor. Nobody is scared. Everybody is free. Scott fell in love right there. He did not just hear the music. He felt the power of it. He saw how it could bring peace to a violent place. He wanted to be the man controlling the crowd. He wanted to be the one making people smile. But his mother saw the danger. She knew the music scene kept him out late. She knew the parties attracted trouble. She wanted him safe. She wanted him off the corners. So she pushed a basketball into his hands. She told him to play sports. She thought the court was safer than the block. And guess what? He was amazing. Scott grew fast. By high school, he stood 6 feet and 3 inches tall. He was a giant among boys. He dominated the basketball court. He could crash the boards and grab rebounds over anyone. He was strong. He was smart. He became the captain of the team. He was a natural leader. When Scott spoke, the other players listened. He learned how to organize a team. He learned how to manage egos. He learned how to win. But deep down, the basketball court was not his stage. The gym smelled like sweat and rubber. but it did not have the magic of the park jams. The squeak of sneakers could not compare to the scratch of a record. His heart was still beating to the rhythm of the Bronx. He kept thinking about those turntables. He kept thinking about the way DJ Kool Herc moved the crowd. Basketball could get him a scholarship. It could get him into college. It was the smart path. It was the safe path. But Scott Sterling was not looking for safety. He was looking for a voice. Then a gift changed his destiny. His grandfather saw the hunger in his eyes. He bought Scott a pair of turntables. They were heavy and mechanical. They were the keys to the kingdom. Scott touched the vinyl. He practiced in his room for hours. He learned to mix. He learned to blend. He applied the same discipline to music that he used in basketball. He did not just want to play songs. He wanted to master the machine. He was on his way to becoming a legend. He had the height of an athlete. He had the brain of a businessman. He had the heart of a humanitarian. He was built to conquer the world. But here is the shadow that follows the light. The very things that made him great were the things that put a target on his back. His generosity made him trust people he should have feared. His confidence made him walk into rooms others ran away from. He thought he could outsmart the streets. He thought he could elevate the game without getting dirt on his hands. He was about to learn a brutal lesson. The music business is just the streets in a fancy suit. And the higher you climb, the harder you fall. The boy who fed the hungry was about to enter a den of lions, and he was bringing nothing but his talent to defend himself. Scott Sterling was not just a tall kid with a jump shot anymore. He was a man with a plan. He did what few people from his neighborhood ever did. He went to college. He earned a degree in business. He earned a degree in social work. He had a piece of paper that said he could leave the hood behind. He could have taken a desk job. He could have moved to a quiet suburb and never looked back. But Scott did not want to leave. He wanted to lead. He found a job as a social worker at the Franklin Avenue Men's Shelter. This was a hard place. It was filled with homeless men who had lost their way. The air smelled of stale cigarettes and lost hope. But Scott walked those halls with his head high. He wanted to help these men find their dignity. And in that shelter, he found a diamond in the rough. There was a homeless graffiti artist living there. His name was Chris Parker. Today, the world knows him as KRS-One, but back then, he was just a kid with a notebook full of rhymes and nowhere to sleep. Scott heard Chris rapping. He listened to the words. They were sharp, they were intelligent, they were powerful. Scott saw the future. He told Chris they were going to be partners. Scott would handle the music and the business. Chris would handle the microphone. They called themselves Boogie Down Productions. Here is the deal. Most rappers in the 1980s were just happy to be in the studio. They signed bad contracts. They gave away their rights for a quick check and a gold chain. Scott LaRock was different. He was the first executive of the streets. He walked into meetings with record labels wearing a suit. He spoke proper English. He looked the white executives in the eye. He knew the value of his product. He treated hip-hop like a corporation. He was building an empire. They released their first album in 1987. It was called Criminal Minded. This album changed the world. Before this record, hip-hop was mostly about partying. It was about having fun at the disco. Scott and KRS-One stripped all the glitter away. They brought the sound back to the concrete. The beats were hard. The lyrics were gritty. It sounded like the subway train rattling on the tracks. It sounded like the truth. They released a song called South Bronx. It was an anthem. It told the world that the Bronx was the true home of hip-hop. It made people proud of where they came from. They released The Bridge Is Over. It destroyed the competition. They were not just making songs. They were winning a war for the culture. Picture the scene in 1987. Scott LaRock is on top of the world. He is 25 years old. He is driving a red Jeep Samurai. The chrome wheels shine under the streetlights. He has money in his pocket. He has the respect of the entire city. When he walks into a club, the music stops. People part like the Red Sea to let him through. He is the king of New York. He is not just a DJ. He is a savior. He proved that you could be smart, educated, and still be street. He proved you could make money without selling drugs. He was the blueprint for every mogul who came after him. Without Scott LaRock, there is no Jay-Z. There is no P. Diddy. There is no Dr. Dre. Scott laid the foundation. He was living the high life. He bought nice clothes. He took care of his mother. He made sure his friends were eating. He was the local hero who made it big. But wait, it gets deeper. Success is a bright light, and bright lights attract bugs. Scott was famous, but he was still accessible. He did not hide behind bodyguards. He did not live in a gated community in California. He was still in the Bronx. He was still driving through the same blocks. He was still trying to save people. He felt invincible. He thought his success was a shield. He thought his reputation would protect him. He believed that because he showed love to the streets would show love back to him. He was wrong. The summer of 1987 was hot. The tension in the city was high. Scott was trying to help a young kid named Demise. Demise was part of their crew. He was having trouble with some guys in the neighborhood. It was over a girl. It was petty. It was small. But in the hood, small things turn into big tragedies. Scott told Demise not to worry. He said he would handle it. He said he would talk to the guys. He was a social worker, remember? He was a negotiator. He believed he could talk his way out of violence. He believed reason would win. While the world saw a smile, the shadows were growing. The music was loud, but the silence was coming. Scott Sterling had climbed the mountain. He had planted his flag at the peak. He looked down and saw a kingdom he helped build. But he did not see the cliff edge right in front of his feet. The architect of reality was about to face the harshest reality of all. The price of fame was due, and the streets were coming to collect. The date was August 27, 1987. It was a hot summer day in the Bronx. The air felt heavy. It stuck to your skin. Scott LaRock climbed into his red Jeep Samurai. The convertible top was down. The sun shined off the chrome wheels. He looked like a king surveying his kingdom. He was 25 years old. He had the #1 rap group in the streets. He had a college degree in his pocket. He had the world at his feet. He did not know he had less than an hour to live. Here is the deal. Scott was not looking for trouble that day. He was looking for peace. His friend and crew member, Demise, was in danger. Some local guys in the Highbridge neighborhood were threatening him. It was over a girl. It was the kind of petty argument that happens every day in the city. Usually, these things end with a fist fight. Sometimes they end with a handshake. Scott believed in the handshake. Remember, this man was a social worker. He was trained to talk people down. He managed the homeless. He negotiated with record executives. He believed his voice was his strongest weapon. He told Demise to get in the Jeep. He said they were going to drive to Highbridge. He said they would talk to the guys. He would squash the beef. He would use his respect to calm the waters. He drove the red Jeep to the Highbridge Gardens housing projects. He pulled up to the curb. The engine idled. The music played softly. Scott saw the guys who were bothering Demise. He did not pull out a weapon. He did not scream threats. He simply spoke. He tried to reason with them. He acted like the big brother. He thought the conversation went well. He thought the tension was gone. He put the Jeep in gear. He prepared to drive away. He thought the mission was accomplished. But gravity pulls hardest when you turn your back. As the Jeep pulled away from the curb, the air shattered. Gunshots rang out. They sounded like firecrackers popping in a metal trash can. But this was not a celebration. 2 bullets tore through the air. They were not aimed at the tires. They were not aimed at the sky. They were aimed at the passengers. 1 bullet missed. It lodged into the dashboard of the Jeep. The other bullet found its mark. It smashed through the convertible top. It struck Scott Sterling in the neck. Picture this moment. The noise stops. The adrenaline spikes. Scott is still driving. The Jeep is still moving forward. For a few seconds, his brain does not register the catastrophe. He turns to Demise. He asks a question that haunts hip-hop history. He asks, "Am I hit?" Blood began to soak his shirt. The invincible suit of armor he thought he wore had failed. The respect of the streets did not stop the lead. The college degree did not stop the bleeding. Chaos took over. Demise grabbed the wheel. They raced toward Lincoln Hospital. The red Jeep, usually a symbol of success, became an ambulance. The wind whipped through the open windows. The sounds of the city blurred into a nightmare. Every bump in the road felt like a clock ticking down. They reached the emergency room. Doctors rushed Scott onto a stretcher. The nurses shouted orders. The smell of antiseptic replaced the smell of summer air. Scott was strong. He was an athlete. He was a fighter. He was conscious when he arrived. He told the doctors he was cold. He told them he was tired. His body was fighting a war it could not win. The bullet had done too much damage. It had severed vital arteries. It had lodged near his spine. The news spread through the Bronx like electricity. People gathered outside the hospital. DJ Red Alert paced the hallways. KRS-One waited for news. The entire hip-hop community held its breath. They could not believe it. Scott LaRock was the smart one. He was the peacekeeper. He was the one who was supposed to make it out. If Scott could be touched, nobody was safe. But wait, it gets worse. He was taken into surgery. The doctors tried to repair the damage. The clock ticked past midnight. August 27 turned into August 28, and then the silence came. Scott Sterling died on the operating table. The heart of Boogie Down Productions stopped beating. The architect of reality was gone. He became the first murder victim in the history of hip-hop. The shock was physical. It felt like a punch to the gut of the culture before this night. Rap was seen as a way out of the violence. It was a party. It was a business. Scott proved that the violence could follow you no matter how high you climbed. The tragedy was heavy. Scott died trying to stop a fight he didn't start. He died doing his job as a social worker, even though he wasn't on the clock. He died because he cared about his friends more than his own safety. Rumors began to swirl immediately. People whispered in the barbershops. They talked on the street corners. Some said it was just a random act of anger, just bad luck. But others looked deeper. They remembered how fast Scott had risen. They remembered how he outsmarted the record labels. Some people close to the situation whispered the word assassination. They claimed Scott was becoming too powerful. He was organizing the artists. He was teaching rappers to own their masters. He was showing young black men how to be executives, not just employees. Was he removed because he knew too much? Was he killed to clear the path for others who would play the game by the corporate rules? We may never know the full truth of the shadows, but we know the facts of the light. The red Jeep sat empty. The turntables sat silent. KRS-One was left without his partner. The Batman of hip-hop had lost his Robin. But in this story, it was the hero who fell and the sidekick who had to carry the torch. The funeral was heartbreaking. The streets of the Bronx filled with mourners. They did not just cry for a man. They cried for a dream. They saw what Scott represented. He was the bridge between the gutter and the boardroom. And someone burned that bridge down with a single bullet. Scott LaRock did not die from a drug overdose. He did not die in a gang war over turf. He died trying to keep the peace. He was the first fallen king, and his death sent a message to every rapper who came after him. It was a warning written in blood. Get your money, get your fame, but never forget that the streets are always watching, and the streets are always hungry. The music business moved on. New stars were born. P. Diddy wore the shiny suits. Jay-Z sat in the corporate chairs. But everyone knew the truth. Scott LaRock did it first. He walked so they could run, but he never got to cross the finish line. The ink was barely dry on the newspapers. The headlines screamed violence. They called it a rap slaying. They called it street justice. The news anchors shook their heads on television. They looked at the Bronx like it was a zoo. They saw a young black man dead in a flashy car. They thought it was just another drug deal gone bad. They thought they knew the story. But here is the ugly truth. The media got it twisted. They did not report on the social worker. They did not mention the college degree hanging on his wall. They did not tell the world that Scott LaRock died trying to stop the violence. They only saw the blood. They did not see the heart. They painted him as a criminal. But the streets knew he was a casualty of peace. The hypocrisy was thick enough to choke on. The same newspapers that called hip-hop a fad were now using his death to sell copies. The same society that ignored the poverty in the Bronx was now judging the survival of its people. Scott was a bridge builder, and when he fell, the gap between the music and the mainstream got wider. Picture the scene in the studio. KRS-One stood alone. He was the voice of the group. But Scott was the brain. Now the brain was gone. KRS felt the weight of the world on his shoulders. He could have folded. He could have grabbed a gun and sought revenge. That is what the streets expected. That is what the movies tell you to do. But KRS-One did something harder. He picked up a microphone. He realized that if Boogie Down Productions died, then Scott died in vain. He had to keep the name alive. He had to finish the mission. The music changed. It got serious. The party vibes of the early days evaporated. The lyrics became lessons. KRS-One started calling himself the teacher. He turned his grief into a curriculum for the youth. But the death of Scott LaRock changed the temperature of the entire room. Before 1987, hip-hop felt invincible. It was a superhero movie. After the shooting, it became a documentary. The rappers realized they were mortal. The gold chains could not stop bullets. The fame could not stop the envy. The fun was over. Survival mode began. And then a movement rose from the ashes. KRS-One launched the Stop the Violence movement. It was a direct response to the tragedy. He gathered the biggest names in the game. He called Public Enemy. He called Heavy D. He called MC Light. They recorded the song Self-Destruction. Listen to the title, Self-Destruction. They were begging their own community to put the guns down. They raised $500,000 for the National Urban League. They tried to save the next Scott LaRock. It was a beautiful moment, but it was a moment born from a casket. But wait, it gets deeper. The music industry saw the headlines, they saw the fear, and they smelled money. They realized that danger sells records. They realized that tragedy brings attention. Instead of protecting their artists, the corporations started to market the violence. They turned the Bronx into a brand. They sold the struggle to suburban kids who never heard a gunshot. Scott LaRock wanted to elevate the mind. The industry wanted to sell the gutter. Years passed, the money got bigger, the cars got faster. Then Tupac died, then Biggie died, then Jam Master Jay died. The list kept growing. But Scott was the first name on the memorial wall. He set the precedent. He showed us that the brightest stars often burn out the fastest. He is the biggest what if in music history. Imagine a world where he lived. He would be standing next to Jay-Z today. He would be running a billion-dollar company. He would be an elder statesman teaching the new generation how to own their masters. He had the blueprint before anyone else knew how to read it. Instead, he is frozen in time. He is forever 25 years old. He is forever sitting in that red Jeep Samurai. He is forever the genius who tried to talk his way out of a war. The world kept spinning. The beats kept dropping. But for the people who knew him, the music never sounded the same again. The silence he left behind was louder than any bass line. And that silence still echoes in every boardroom and every street corner in hip-hop today. We have to ask the hard question, what if that bullet missed? What if Scott LaRock drove home safe that night? The entire map of music would look different today. He was the prototype. He was the first one to wear a suit to the corporate meeting and street clothes to the block. He was the bridge. Music mogul Chris Lighty told us the truth. Scott was Puff Daddy before there was a Bad Boy Records. He was Jay-Z before there was a Rockefeller. He understood that hip-hop was not just a hobby. It was a billion-dollar industry waiting to happen. He held the keys to the kingdom, but he never got to unlock the door. But here is the beauty in the tragedy. His partner did not let the name die. KRS-One carried Scott on his back. For years, every concert and every album kept the name alive. KRS-One made sure the world knew that Boogie Down Productions was a team. He turned his grief into power. He started the Stop the Violence movement. He tried to save the next generation from the same fate. He turned the memory of his friend into a shield for others. Scott Sterling was a social worker until his last breath. He did not die in a drug deal. He did not die robbing a bank. He died trying to make peace between brothers. He was too good for the game he played. He showed us that you can be from the gutter and still have class. He showed us that your mind is more powerful than any weapon. Picture the legacy today. His name is spoken with reverence by the giants of the industry. He is the ghost in the machine. Every time a young artist reads a contract, Scott is there. Every time a rapper owns their own business, Scott is watching. He laid the foundation. The skyscraper of hip-hop was built on his shoulders. He proved that a black man from the Bronx could sit at the head of the table. He gave everything to the culture, and the culture gave him immortality in return. He was the first to fall, so that others could stand tall. Some stories end without closure, but dignity doesn't need applause. Do you remember the summer of 1987? Did you feel the shift when we lost him? Share your memories in the comments below. We want to honor the history with you. Like the video and subscribe for more stories about the legends who paved the way. Peace.